The screams of the dying had long since faded from the walls of Haven Ridge, but Zephyr Chin could still hear them echoing in the wind that swept across the barricaded settlement. Standing atop the reinforced watchtower, she pressed the binoculars against her weathered face and surveyed the horizon where smoke columns rose like grave markers against the crimson dawn. 3 years had passed since the blight first swept across America, turning cities into graveyards and neighbors into nightmares, yet the sight of the approaching horde still sent ice through her veins. How many this time? Isolde Varga's voice carried up from the ladder, her Hungarian accent thick with exhaustion. The biochemist climbed the final rungs with practiced efficiency, her laboratory coat now more brown than white, stained with the countless battles they'd fought to reach this moment. Zephyr lowered the binoculars, her almond-shaped eyes reflecting the determination that had kept their group of survivors alive when larger, better-equipped settlements had fallen. Too many to count. They're moving faster than usual, almost like they're being driven by something. She handed the binoculars to Isolde, who immediately focused on the shambling mass that stretched beyond the dead cornfields. We knew this day would come. The other settlements have fallen, one by one. Denver, Phoenix, even the military stronghold in Colorado Springs. We're all that's left in this region. The weight of those words settled between them like lead. Haven Ridge had started as a desperate attempt by 200 survivors to create something resembling civilization in the ruins of a small Nebraska farming town. Now, barely 60 remained, and they represented one of the last organized human settlements west of the Mississippi. Isolde adjusted the focus, studying the approaching threat with the clinical detachment that had made her invaluable during the early days of the outbreak. There's something different about them, Zephyr. The way they're moving in formation, almost like a migration pattern. It's not random anymore. Below them, the settlement buzzed with controlled chaos as their people prepared for what everyone knew would be their final stand. Thorne Blackwood emerged from the supply depot, his muscular frame weighted down with ammunition cases. The former construction worker had adapted to the apocalypse with surprising grace, his ability to scavenge and fortify making him indispensable. His gruff exterior hid a protective nature that had saved countless lives, though the haunted look in his green eyes spoke of the prices he'd paid along the way. Meridian's got the evacuation protocols ready, he called up to them, setting down the cases to wipe sweat from his brow. But you know as well as I do that there's nowhere left to run. The radio chatter from the eastern settlements stopped 3 days ago. Esperanza Rodriguez's voice crackled through the settlement's communication system, her Spanish accent lending an almost musical quality to the grim updates. All defensive positions report ready. Kai has the electrical systems primed, and our power grid is holding steady. We've got maybe 18 hours before they reach our perimeter. Zephyr felt the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders. She had never asked to lead these people, but when Colonel Martinez fell during the evacuation of Lincoln, the role had fallen to her by necessity rather than choice. Her background in military strategy, learned during her brief stint at West Point before the world ended, had kept them alive this long. Now it would either save them or ensure they died fighting rather than fleeing. Onyx, what's your position? She spoke into her radio, knowing the sniper would be positioned somewhere in the outer defenses. Northwest Ridge, boss. Got eyes on about 3,000 of the bastards, maybe more coming over the hills. They'll hit our outer barricades sometime after midnight. Onyx Williams's voice carried the calm professionalism that had made her one of their most valuable defenders. The former police marksman had an almost supernatural ability to read the movement patterns of the infected, a skill that had prevented dozens of breaches over the years. Isolde handed back the binoculars, her expression troubled. Zephyr, I need to show you something in the lab before this begins. Something I discovered about the blood samples we collected from the last attack. It might change everything we think we know about this fight. The urgency in her voice made Zephyr's stomach clench with apprehension. In 3 years of fighting the infected, they had learned to adapt, to survive, to kill efficiently. But they had never truly understood what they were fighting beyond the basic mechanics of the blight virus. If Isolde had discovered something significant now, with hours remaining before their final battle, it could either offer salvation or confirm their doom. As they climbed down from the watchtower, Zephyr caught sight of Meridian Cross organizing the civilian evacuation procedures with the methodical patience that had made her a beloved teacher before the world ended. Even now, facing annihilation, she maintained a gentle authority that kept their community from dissolving into panic. Children who had never known a world without monsters clung to her worn dress, finding comfort in her steady presence. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Haven Ridge, transforming their sanctuary into a maze of light and darkness. Tomorrow, this place would either stand as humanity's greatest triumph or become another tomb in the graveyard of civilization. But tonight, it was still home. Isolde's makeshift laboratory occupied what had once been the town's medical clinic, its sterile white walls now covered with charts tracking infection patterns, survival rates, and the terrifying evolution of the blight virus. Zephyr followed her through the narrow corridor, past shelves lined with salvaged medical equipment and carefully rationed antibiotics. The familiar smell of antiseptic mixed with the acrid scent of the chemical treatments Isolde used to neutralize infected blood samples. "Look at this," Isolde said, activating a battery-powered microscope she had jerry-rigged with parts scavenged from the local high school. The image projected onto a cracked tablet screen showed blood cells unlike anything Zephyr had seen before. Where normal infected blood typically showed the characteristic dark threading of the blight virus, these samples pulsed with an almost organic rhythm, as if the infection itself was alive and thinking. "These samples came from the infected we killed during last week's probe attack," Isolde continued, adjusting the magnification. "Notice how the viral load has changed. It's not just spreading randomly anymore. There's organization, purpose. The infected aren't just mindless predators hunting for food. They're being directed." Zephyr leaned closer to the screen, her military training helping her recognize patterns that might escape civilian observation. "Directed by what? Some kind of hive mind?" "That's what I thought initially, but look at this." Isolde pulled up another slide, this one showing brain tissue from an infected specimen they had managed to capture and study before putting it down. "The virus has restructured the neural pathways, but not randomly. It's created new connections, new centers of activity. Whatever is controlling them, it's smart. It's learning." The implications hit Zephyr like a physical blow. If the infected were being guided by some form of collective intelligence, then every battle they had fought, every victory they had celebrated, had been observed and analyzed. Their tactics, their weaknesses, their defensive capabilities were all known to their enemy. Haven Ridge wasn't humanity's last stand, it was a laboratory where they were being studied before final elimination. "How long have you known?" Zephyr asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've suspected for weeks, but I needed more samples to be certain. The infected that attacked the Morrison settlement 2 months ago showed similar patterns, but I thought it might be environmental. Now I'm sure. The blight isn't just a virus anymore, Zephyr. It's becoming something else entirely." Outside the clinic, the sounds of preparation continued as their defenders checked weapons and reinforced barricades. Thorne's voice carried across the settlement as he directed the positioning of their improvised explosives, his calm professionalism masking the fear that everyone felt but refused to acknowledge. They had survived this long by maintaining discipline and hope, but the knowledge Isolde had shared threatened to shatter both. Esperanza appeared in the doorway, her communication equipment strapped across her shoulders like technological armor. "Zephyr, we're picking up something strange on the long-range frequencies. It's not quite speech, but it's definitely not random static either. Whatever's out there, it's trying to communicate." The 3 women moved to Esperanza's communication center, a cluttered room filled with radios, computers, and monitoring equipment salvaged from emergency services and military installations. The Spanish communications expert had managed to maintain contact with distant settlements until their final transmissions, documenting the systematic fall of human civilization one frequency at a time. "Listen to this," Esperanza said, adjusting the controls on her primary receiver. The speakers filled with a low, rhythmic sound that seemed almost like breathing but too regular, too purposeful to be natural. Embedded within the rhythm were subtle variations, patterns that suggested meaning without revealing understanding. It started 3 hours ago, Esperanza continued. Right around the time the Horde changed direction toward us. I think they're coordinating something bigger than just an attack. Zephyr felt the weight of command pressing down on her with crushing force. Every decision she had made, every life she had been responsible for, had led to this moment. The infected weren't just hunting them, they were being systematically eliminated by an intelligence that understood human tactics and psychology better than the humans themselves. Kai Nakamura burst through the door, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. The Japanese engineer had been monitoring their defensive systems when something had triggered every early warning sensor simultaneously. Zephyr, you need to see this. The perimeter sensors are picking up movement from all directions. They're not just coming from the north anymore. We're completely surrounded. The strategic situation crystallized in Zephyr's mind with terrible clarity. The infected hadn't been wandering toward Haven Ridge, they had been herded there by whatever intelligence now controlled them. The settlement wasn't humanity's last fortress, it was a trap, and they had walked into it willingly. How much time do we have? She asked, her voice steady despite the chaos spinning through her thoughts. Maybe 6 hours before they reach our outer defenses, Kai replied, consulting the tablet that displayed their sensor network. But Zephyr, that's not the worst part. The movement patterns suggest they're waiting for something. They could attack now, but they're holding position just outside our detection range. Meridian's voice echoed through the settlement's public address system as she announced the evening meal, her teacher's instincts maintaining routine even as apocalypse approached. The normalcy of her announcement contrasted sharply with the existential terror building in the communication center, reminding them all of what they were fighting to preserve. We need to tell the others, Zephyr decided, knowing that secrets would only breed panic when their people needed unity most. But we do it carefully. They deserve to understand what we're facing, but they also need to believe we can survive it. As the 4 women prepared to face their community with the most devastating news possible, the rhythmic sound from the radio continued its hypnotic pattern, counting down to something none of them could yet comprehend. The settlement's community center had once hosted town meetings and high school basketball games, its hardwood floors echoing with the laughter of children and the cheers of proud parents. Now it served as their war room, its walls covered with defensive maps and supply inventories that told the stark story of their dwindling resources. 63 souls gathered in the dim light of battery-powered lanterns, their faces reflecting the mixture of determination and fear that had become the permanent expression of survivors. Zephyr stood before them, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes fixed on her weather-beaten face. These people had followed her through countless battles, trusted her decisions when hope seemed impossible, and now she had to tell them that everything they believed about their enemy was wrong. Behind her, Isolde clutched the tablet containing her research data, while Esperanza monitored the communications equipment they had brought to track the approaching threat in real time. We've learned something about the infected that changes everything, Zephyr began, her voice carrying the authority that had kept them alive but tempered with the compassion that made her worth following. The attacks we've survived, the patterns we've observed, they're not random. Something is controlling the infected, directing them with intelligence and purpose. The murmur that rippled through the crowd spoke of fear, but also of a grim understanding. Many of them had noticed the changes in infected behavior over recent months, the increasing coordination that had made their attacks more effective and their retreats more strategic. Marcus Volkov, the former librarian who had become their unofficial historian, spoke for many when he asked, "What kind of intelligence? Are we talking about some kind of military experiment gone wrong?" Isolde stepped forward, her scientist's mind struggling to explain concepts that challenged the very nature of what they understood about life and death. The virus has evolved beyond our initial understanding. It's not just reanimating dead tissue anymore, it's restructuring neural networks to create something like a collective consciousness. Every infected individual is connected to a larger network, sharing information and receiving instructions. Thorne's gruff voice cut through the growing tension. So what you're telling us is that everything we've killed, everything we've fought, has been watching us and learning our moves? Yes, Zephyr confirmed, knowing that honesty was the only foundation upon which they could build their final defense. Which means our usual tactics won't work. They know how we fight, how we think, what our weaknesses are. A woman named Vera Kowalski, who had lost her husband in the Denver evacuation, stood with her young daughter pressed against her side. Then what's the point? If they know everything about us, how can we possibly win? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre, poisoning hope and feeding despair. Zephyr felt the familiar crushing weight of command, the burden of being responsible for lives when death seemed inevitable. But before she could answer, an unexpected voice spoke from the back of the room. "Because we're still human," said Onyx Williams, stepping forward from where she had been monitoring the windows for signs of the approaching threat. "They might know our tactics, but they don't understand what drives us. They don't comprehend sacrifice, love, or the decision to fight when victory is impossible." Her words carried the authority of someone who had stared death in the face countless times and chosen to keep pulling the trigger. The former police sniper had seen the worst of human nature during the early days of the outbreak, but she had also witnessed the best, the moments when ordinary people became heroes simply because the alternative was unacceptable. Meridian stood next, her teacher's instincts recognizing a moment when leadership could either unite or fracture their community. "My grandmother survived the siege of Leningrad during World War II. The Germans surrounded the city, cut off all supplies, and waited for starvation to do what their armies couldn't. But the people didn't surrender. They didn't give up. They found ways to survive that their enemies never anticipated because they were fighting for something bigger than military strategy." Kai nodded, understanding the parallel. "The infected might know our defensive patterns, but they don't know our capacity for innovation under pressure. We can still surprise them if we're willing to try something they've never seen before." Esperanza's radio crackled to life, interrupting the growing sense of determination with an urgent update. "Movement on all sectors. They're tightening the circle, but they're still holding position about 2 kilometers out. It's like they're waiting for orders." The community center fell silent as everyone processed the implications. Their enemy was patient, organized, and in complete control of the tactical situation. Traditional defensive strategies would fail because they had been observed and analyzed. But somewhere in the growing darkness, 63 human beings began to understand that their greatest weapon wasn't their guns or their fortifications. "We're going to do something they'll never expect," Zephyr announced, a plan beginning to form in her mind that was either brilliant or suicidal. "We're going to attack them first." The audible intake of breath from the assembled survivors spoke to the apparent madness of the proposal. Their defensive position was strong, their ammunition limited, and their numbers pitifully small compared to the force surrounding them. But Thorne's weathered face split into the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him in weeks. "Now you're talking," he said, his construction worker's pragmatism recognizing the brutal logic of the plan. "They're expecting us to hunker down and wait for them to probe our defenses. They've probably analyzed every defensive battle we've ever fought. But they've never seen us go on the offensive when we're outnumbered 100 to 1. Isolde consulted her tablet, her scientific mind already working through the possibilities. If their collective intelligence operates through proximity and communication, disrupting their coordination might be possible. But it would require getting close enough to their command structure to cause significant damage. The plan that emerged over the following hour was desperate, dangerous, and completely insane. It relied on human unpredictability, the willingness to sacrifice everything for a chance at victory, and the hope that love and determination could overcome impossible odds. As they prepared to face the longest night of their lives, the people of Haven Ridge discovered that their humanity wasn't a weakness to be exploited. It was a weapon their enemies couldn't understand. The plan that crystallized in the flickering light of the community center was born from desperation and fueled by the kind of reckless courage that emerged when survival and death became equally acceptable outcomes. Zephyr stood before the tactical map that Kai had projected onto the wall, its digital display showing the heat signatures of thousands of infected arranged in precise formations around their settlement. The pattern was too organized, too purposeful to be natural predator behavior. There, Isolde pointed to a concentration of signatures approximately 1,500 meters northeast of their position. The neural restructuring I observed requires proximity to a central coordinating node. If their collective intelligence operates like a distributed network, There has to be a primary hub somewhere in that concentration. Esperanza adjusted her equipment, fine-tuning the reception to isolate the rhythmic communication pattern they had detected earlier. The signal strength is definitely strongest from that direction. Whatever is controlling them, it's broadcasting from approximately the same location as Sold identified. Thorne studied the tactical display with the practical eye of someone who had spent the outbreak learning to kill efficiently and survive against impossible odds. So we're talking about fighting through maybe 1,000 infected to reach their command center, destroying whatever is coordinating them, and fighting our way back before the rest of the Horde realizes what we've done. The stark summary of their situation would have been laughable if their circumstances weren't so desperate. 63 people, armed with scavenged weapons and limited ammunition, planning to assault a force that outnumbered them by orders of magnitude. But Onyx Williams was already checking her rifle, her sniper's mind calculating angles and distances with the cold precision that had kept her alive when larger, better-equipped teams had fallen. "How many people for the assault team?" she asked, her voice carrying the calm professionalism that made her invaluable in crisis situations. 12, Zephyr decided, knowing that larger numbers would sacrifice speed and stealth while smaller numbers would lack the firepower to fight through the infected ranks. "Volunteers only. Everyone else maintains defensive positions here and prepares for our return." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of chairs scraping against the wooden floor as nearly every adult in the settlement stood simultaneously. Vera Kowalski stepped forward, her daughter still pressed against her side, and spoke with the quiet determination of someone who had already lost everything once. "We all go, or none of us go," she said simply. "This isn't just about military tactics anymore. If you're right about their intelligence, then they know we're planning something. Our only advantage is doing something so completely insane that they can't predict it." Meridian nodded, her teacher's wisdom recognizing the psychological truth in Vera's words. "The children stay in the bunker with the emergency supplies and medical equipment. Everyone else participates in the assault. We overwhelm their coordination through sheer human unpredictability." The audacity of the proposal struck everyone simultaneously. Instead of a careful military operation, they were planning a desperate charge by every fighting-capable person in the settlement. It violated every principle of tactical planning, abandoned defensive advantages, and relied entirely on chaos and human determination to overcome organized, intelligent opposition. "It could work," Kai said slowly, his engineer's mind working through the logistics. "If their coordination depends on maintaining formation and following strategic patterns, a completely random assault by our entire population might disrupt their ability to respond effectively." Isolde consulted her research data, cross-referencing behavioral patterns with the neural restructuring she had observed. Collective intelligence networks are vulnerable to system overload. If we can create enough simultaneous threats from unpredictable directions, we might cause a cascading failure in their coordination. Esperanza monitored the communication frequencies, tracking the rhythmic pattern that seemed to coordinate the infected movement. "The signal is getting stronger. I think they're preparing for their own assault on our position. If we're going to do this, it has to be soon." Zephyr felt the weight of command transforming into something else, something that transcended military hierarchy and touched the fundamental human response to extinction. These people weren't soldiers following orders, they were families and friends choosing to face annihilation together rather than die separately. The distinction mattered in ways that no tactical manual could explain. "We leave in 2 hours, she announced. "Full assault, everyone who can carry a weapon. We punch through their lines, destroy whatever is coordinating them, and fight our way home. No one gets left behind, no matter what happens." The next 2 hours passed with the surreal combination of frantic preparation and profound calm that characterized the final moments before battle. Weapons were cleaned and loaded, ammunition was distributed, and goodbye letters were written to loved ones who might not survive the night. Meridian gathered the children in the reinforced bunker beneath the school, reading them stories and singing lullabies while their parents prepared to fight for their future. Thorne moved through the settlement like a guardian angel, checking equipment and offering quiet words of encouragement to people who had never been soldiers but were preparing to die like warriors. His gruff exterior concealed a tender heart that had been broken repeatedly by loss but never stopped caring about the people who had become his family. As the assault team gathered at the settlement's main gate, Onyx took her position on the watchtower that would provide covering fire for their initial advance. Her sniper rifle was loaded with armor-piercing rounds salvaged from a National Guard depot, each bullet representing weeks of careful scavenging and preparation. "Remember," Zephyr addressed the assembled group, her voice carrying across the night air to reach every person preparing to leave the safety of their walls. "We're not just fighting for our survival anymore. We're fighting for the idea that human beings deserve to exist, that love and hope and determination mean something in this universe." The infected horde waited in the darkness beyond their perimeter, organized and patient and supremely confident in their superiority. But they had never faced anything like the desperate charge of humans who had chosen love over fear, sacrifice over survival, and hope over despair. The final battle for Haven Ridge was about to begin. The night air carried the scent of death and decay as the assault team assembled beyond Haven Ridge's protective walls. 51 souls stood in the darkness, armed with everything from military rifles to farm tools, united by the desperate understanding that conventional survival was no longer possible. Zephyr checked her weapon one final time, feeling the familiar weight of the modified AR-15 that had saved her life countless times over the past 3 years. "Movement patterns indicate they're still maintaining formation," Esperanza whispered into her radio, her communications equipment jury-rigged to provide real-time intelligence during their advance. "Signal strength is consistent from the northeast. Whatever we're looking for, it's still in the same location." Isolde carried her medical kit alongside her pistol, knowing that their mission would likely require both healing and killing before the night ended. The scientists' research had identified their target, but reaching it would require fighting through a coordinated enemy that understood human tactics better than humans understood infected behavior. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted her equipment, the weight of scientific discovery mixed with the terror of impending combat. Thorn moved through the group like a protective shepherd, his construction workers' instincts adapted to the brutal requirements of post-apocalyptic warfare. The improvised explosives strapped to his vest represented months of careful preparation and resource gathering, each device crafted from materials scavenged from the ruins of civilization. His weathered face showed no fear, only the grim determination of someone who had already accepted death as the price of protecting what remained of humanity. 30 seconds, Zephyr announced, knowing that hesitation would transform courage into terror and determination into paralysis. The assault had to begin before their minds had time to fully process the madness of what they were attempting. "Stay together, watch each other's backs, and remember that we're fighting for something they can never understand." Kai adjusted the night vision equipment he had modified from security cameras and hunting gear, providing limited visibility in the darkness that concealed both their advance and the enemy's positions. The Japanese engineer had proven invaluable during their survival, but tonight his technical skills would be tested in ways that no manual could prepare him for. Vera Kowalski held her husband's service pistol with steady hands, her daughter's photograph tucked into her breast pocket as a reminder of why surrender was not an option. The widow had lost everything during the Denver evacuation, but she had found new purpose in protecting the children of Haven Ridge. Tonight, that protection required walking into hell with the slim hope of destroying it from within. "Go," Zephyr whispered, and 51 people stepped into the darkness beyond their walls. The infected heard them coming long before visual contact was made. The shuffling sound of reanimated bodies moving through the night reached their ears as a low rumble, like distant thunder or an approaching storm. But instead of the random wandering they had observed during previous encounters, the infected moved with purpose and coordination that sent chills through even the most experienced fighters. "First contact, 200 meters, Onyx's voice crackled through their communication system from her overwatch position in the settlement. Her sniper rifle had clear lines of sight to support their initial advance, but once they penetrated deeper into enemy territory, they would be beyond her ability to provide covering fire. The infected emerged from the cornfields like shadows given substance, their movements coordinated and deliberate rather than the mindless shambling that had characterized earlier encounters. Zephyr raised her rifle and fired, watching the nearest target drop with the precise headshot that had become second nature after 3 years of survival. But instead of the random chaos that usually followed gunfire, the surrounding infected immediately adapted their approach, using cover and flanking maneuvers that suggested tactical awareness. "They're learning from our attack patterns in real time," Isolde observed, her scientist's mind noting the behavioral changes even as she fought for her life. "The collective intelligence is processing our tactics and adjusting their response faster than we can adapt." Thorne's improvised explosives created gaps in the infected lines, but those gaps closed with frightening efficiency as reinforcements moved to fill the breaches. The construction worker's combat experience had taught him to think in terms of structural weaknesses and strategic demolition, but he was fighting an enemy that rebuilt its defenses faster than he could destroy them. "Signal strength is increasing," Esperanza reported, her communication equipment detecting the rhythmic pattern that coordinated the infected assault. "We're getting closer to whatever is controlling them, but they're throwing everything they have at us to prevent us from reaching it." The assault team fought with the desperate efficiency of people who understood that retreat was not an option. Every bullet had to count, every movement had to advance them toward their objective, and every second of hesitation could result in the complete failure of their mission. They were not soldiers, they were ordinary people pushed beyond the limits of human endurance by circumstances that had destroyed civilization itself. Kai's night vision equipment revealed the true scope of what they faced. Hundreds of infected surrounded them in coordinated formations, but gaps existed in their lines that suggested vulnerability. "There," he called out, pointing toward a drainage ditch that led toward the concentration of heat signatures Isolde had identified. "We can use the water management system to approach their command center from an unexpected direction." The drainage ditch had been built to handle spring flooding, its concrete channels designed to carry excess water away from the farming community that Haven Ridge had once been. Now it provided concealment as the assault team crawled through mud and debris toward their target, the walls of the channel offering protection from infected observation while funneling them directly toward the source of the coordinating signal. 100 meters, Esperanza whispered, her equipment indicating that they were approaching the heart of the infected intelligence network. "Whatever is controlling them, we're almost on top of it." But as they emerged from the drainage system and prepared for their final assault, the true horror of their situation became clear. The infected weren't just surrounding them, they were hurting them. Every choice they had made, every tactical decision that had brought them to this point, had been anticipated and manipulated by an intelligence that understood human psychology better than humans understood themselves. They were walking into a trap that had been prepared specifically for them. The realization hit Zephyr like a physical blow as the assault team emerged from the drainage ditch into a clearing that had obviously been prepared for their arrival. The infected stood in perfect formation around the perimeter, their movements synchronized with a precision that spoke of careful planning rather than random positioning. In the center of the clearing, a structure that defied immediate understanding dominated the space like an altar dedicated to evolutionary horror. "It's beautiful," Isolde whispered, her scientist's mind struggling to process what she was seeing even as her survival instincts screamed warnings about the danger they faced. The structure was composed entirely of infected bodies, but not in the chaotic pile of corpses they might have expected. Instead, hundreds of infected had been woven together into a living network, their nervous systems physically connected through tendrils of mutated tissue that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Esperanza's communication equipment went wild, detecting signal patterns that overwhelmed her receivers with their complexity and power. "The coordination center," she breathed, understanding that they had found the source of the collective intelligence that had been directing the infected assault on human civilization. "It's not just controlling them. It's incorporating their neural networks into something larger." The infected surrounding them remained motionless, their attention focused on the intruders who had fought through impossible odds to reach this place. But their stillness wasn't the mindless patience of predators waiting for prey, it was the calculated observation of an intelligence studying specimens that had exceeded expected parameters. "We've been played," Thorne said quietly, his construction workers' eye recognizing the deliberate nature of their situation. The explosives strapped to his vest suddenly felt inadequate compared to the scale of what they faced. "Every choice we made to get here, every tactical decision, they were steering us toward this moment." Kai's night vision equipment revealed the full scope of the coordination center, showing neural connections that extended deep underground like roots of a vast organic tree. The infected network wasn't just controlling the local population, it was connected to similar structures across the continent, creating a communication system that spanned the entire infected population of North America. How many people do you think it took to build this? Vera asked, her voice steady despite the horror of the realization. Her husband's service pistol felt inadequate in her hands, but she maintained her grip with the determination of someone who had already lost everything once and refused to lose again. All of them, Meridian's voice carried across the clearing from where she had positioned herself to protect the group's flanks. The former teacher understood instinctively that they were looking at the collected consciousness of every human being who had been infected and absorbed into the network. Every person who turned, every settlement that fell, they all became part of this thing. The bioluminescent patterns pulsing through the coordination center shifted and intensified, creating a hypnotic display that seemed to communicate directly with the human brain on levels below conscious awareness. Zephyr felt her thoughts becoming confused, her tactical awareness clouded by patterns that spoke to evolutionary fears older than human civilization. Don't look directly at it, Isolde warned, her medical training recognizing the neurological manipulation that the structure was attempting. The light patterns are designed to induce a hypnotic state that makes subjects more susceptible to infection. It's trying to convert us without physical contact. But even as she spoke, several members of the assault team were already showing signs of neural disruption. Their movements became sluggish, their eyes reflecting the bioluminescent patterns that pulsed from the coordination center. The collective intelligence had evolved beyond simple physical infection, it could now convert humans through psychological manipulation alone. The explosives, Thorne said, understanding that their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. If we can destroy the coordination center, we might disrupt their network long enough to escape. Onyx's voice crackled through their communication system from her overwatch position back at the settlement. Zephyr, you've got massive movement on all sectors. Whatever you found, destroying it has triggered a response from every infected in the region. You've got maybe 5 minutes before you're completely overrun. The tactical situation crystallized with terrible clarity. They had found the source of the infected intelligence, but destroying it would require someone to get close enough to plant explosives while under direct neural assault from the coordination center. The bioluminescent patterns were already affecting their cognitive function, and prolonged exposure would result in conversion rather than death. I'll do it, Vera said, stepping forward with the calm determination of someone who had already made peace with sacrifice. My daughter is safe in the bunker. If this thing can be destroyed, her future is worth my life. No, Zephyr replied, knowing that command meant accepting responsibility for the hardest decisions. This is my call to make. The rest of you create a distraction and prepare for immediate withdrawal. But before either woman could move toward the coordination center, Kai stepped forward with his engineer's understanding of complex systems and structural vulnerabilities. Look at the neural connections, he said, pointing to the tendrils that linked the infected bodies together. They're following the path of least electrical resistance. If we can overload the system with feedback instead of trying to destroy it physically, we might be able to cause a cascade failure. Esperanza understood immediately, her communication expertise recognizing the potential for using the infected network's own coordination system against it. My equipment can generate a broad-spectrum electromagnetic pulse. If we can get close enough to inject the signal directly into their network, it might cause the kind of feedback loop Kai is describing. The plan that emerged was desperate and brilliant in equal measure. Instead of trying to destroy the coordination center through conventional explosives, they would attempt to weaponize the infected intelligence network against itself, using its own communication systems to create a feedback loop that would overload the collective consciousness. But implementing the plan required someone to get close enough to the coordination center to interface with its neural network directly, and prolonged exposure to the bioluminescent patterns would result in conversion long before the feedback loop could be established. As the infected began closing their perimeter and the assault team prepared for their final gambit, they realized that victory would require a sacrifice that none of them were prepared to make. The infected closed their ranks with mechanical precision as Esperanza worked frantically to modify her communication equipment for direct interface with the coordination center's neural network. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency despite the hypnotic patterns that pulsed through the clearing, each bioluminescent wave attempting to rewrite her brain chemistry and convert her to the collective consciousness that had absorbed millions of human minds. 60 seconds, Thorne announced, his explosives primed as a backup plan if the electromagnetic pulse failed to create the cascade failure they desperately needed. The construction worker had positioned himself between the coordination center and their escape route, knowing that someone had to hold the line while Esperanza completed her modifications. Kai assisted with the technical aspects of the interface, his engineering background providing the theoretical framework for weaponizing communication technology against a biological neural network. The feedback frequency needs to match their neural oscillation patterns, he explained, connecting salvaged components with the desperate improvisation that had kept their technology functional throughout the apocalypse. "I'm getting neural interference just from proximity," Isolde reported, her medical training allowing her to monitor the neurological effects that prolonged exposure to the coordination center was having on the assault team. Several members were already showing signs of cognitive disruption, their movements becoming increasingly synchronized with the infected around them. Zephyr maintained overwatch while fighting the hypnotic effects that threatened to overwhelm her tactical awareness. The bioluminescent patterns seemed designed to exploit specific vulnerabilities in human psychology, triggering responses that bypassed conscious resistance and operated directly on evolutionary fear and fascination. "Signal ready," Esperanza announced, her modified equipment now capable of injecting a broad-spectrum electromagnetic pulse directly into the infected communication network. "But I need physical contact with one of the neural tendrils to establish the interface." The silence that followed carried the weight of understanding. Physical contact with the coordination center would result in immediate infection and absorption into the collective consciousness. Whoever made the connection would destroy the network but lose their humanity in the process. "I'll do it," Vera said for the second time, stepping forward with the serene acceptance of someone who had already chosen sacrifice over survival. "My daughter needs a future, and this is the only way to give her one." But before she could move toward the neural tendrils, Meridian stepped past her with the quiet authority that had made her a beloved teacher and trusted leader. "No," she said simply. "This is what I've been preparing for my entire life. Teaching children to face tomorrow requires someone willing to pay the price for their future." The former educator moved toward the coordination center with the same calm determination she had shown when reading bedtime stories to terrified children or organizing evacuation procedures during infected attacks. Her weathered hands reached for the nearest neural tendril while Esperanza prepared to inject the feedback signal that would either save humanity or kill them all. "Meridian, wait," Isolde called out, her scientist's mind suddenly processing a possibility that no one had considered. The neural restructuring I observed in the blood samples showed extensive integration between human consciousness and the viral network. If someone with strong enough will can maintain their individual identity during initial contact, they might be able to influence the network from within instead of being absorbed by it. The theoretical possibility offered hope but required faith in human consciousness that bordered on religious belief. Could individual will and determination overcome the collective intelligence that had absorbed millions of minds? Was human identity strong enough to survive direct integration with an evolutionary force that had conquered an entire continent? "Only one way to find out," Meridian said, grasping the neural tendril as Esperanza activated her modified communication equipment. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Meridian's consciousness exploded outward as she made contact with the collective intelligence network, her individual awareness suddenly connected to millions of infected minds across North America. But instead of being absorbed and converted, her teacher's instincts recognized the network for what it truly was, a classroom filled with students who had forgotten how to be human. Through the neural connection, she could sense the original personalities that had been integrated into the collective consciousness. They weren't destroyed, they were lost, confused, seeking guidance and purpose that the network provided through coordination and shared awareness. The infected weren't evil, they were tragic, human minds trapped within a system that had promised unity but delivered only servitude. I can feel them, Meridian's voice carried across the clearing, though whether she spoke aloud or through the neural network itself was unclear. All the people who were lost, all the minds that were absorbed. They're still in here, waiting for someone to show them the way home. Esperanza activated the electromagnetic pulse, injecting feedback patterns into the neural network that began creating the cascade failure Kai had theorized. But instead of simply overloading the system, the feedback was being modulated and directed by Meridian's consciousness, transforming destructive interference into something resembling education. Through the network, Meridian reached out to the absorbed human consciousnesses and began teaching them to remember who they had been before infection. The collective intelligence that had controlled them was vast and powerful, but it was also vulnerable to the most human of qualities, the desire to choose one's own destiny. It's working, Kai observed, his engineering background allowing him to monitor the system's response to the feedback injection. The network is fragmenting as individual consciousnesses begin asserting independence from collective control. Across the clearing, the infected began showing signs of confusion and disorientation as their coordination network collapsed. The precise formations dissolved into random movement, the synchronized behavior replaced by individual actions that suggested the return of human will and choice. But the victory came at a price that none of them had anticipated. Meridian's consciousness, spread across millions of infected minds, was fragmenting under the strain of maintaining individual identity while connected to the vast network. She was saving the absorbed human personalities, but the effort was destroying her own cognitive coherence. Meridian, Zephyr called out, knowing that their teacher and friend was sacrificing not just her life but her very sense of self to give humanity a second chance. Tell the children, Meridian's voice was fading, her consciousness dispersing through the network as she continued her impossible task of teaching millions of lost souls to remember their humanity. Tell them that love is stronger than fear, that hope survives even in darkness, and that teachers never really die as long as their lessons live on. The coordination center collapsed as the neural network that had sustained it fragmented beyond repair. Across the continent, infected populations began experiencing the return of human consciousness, though the process would be traumatic and incomplete for many. The collective intelligence that had threatened to absorb human civilization was dying, killed not by violence but by the most powerful force in the universe, a teacher's love for her students. 6 months after the collapse of the coordination networks, Zephyr stood in the rebuilt playground of Haven Ridge Elementary School, watching children who had never known a world without monsters learn to play games that had been forgotten during the apocalypse. The laughter that echoed across the settlement carried a quality of hope that had been absent from human society for nearly 4 years, a sound that spoke of healing and possibility rather than mere survival. The infected still wandered the wasteland beyond their walls, but they were changed. Most retained the physical damage caused by the blight virus, but their behavior had transformed from coordinated predation to confused wandering as fragmented human consciousness struggled to reassert itself within damaged neural networks. Some had begun showing signs of memory recovery, recognizing faces and places from their lives before infection, though the process was slow and often heartbreakingly incomplete. Isolde emerged from her expanded laboratory, her research now focused on developing treatments that might help the recovering infected rebuild their damaged cognitive functions. The scientists' work had taken on new urgency as settlements across the continent reported similar phenomena, infected populations experiencing spontaneous moments of human awareness, speaking fragments of remembered names, and showing behavior that suggested the gradual return of individual personality. Any progress with the memory reconstruction protocols? Zephyr asked, knowing that Isolde's research represented their best hope for helping the millions of people trapped between human consciousness and viral mutation. Some, Isolde replied, consulting the tablet that contained her latest findings. The neural pathways that Meridian somehow restored are fragile but functional. With proper support and rehabilitation, approximately 30% of the affected population might recover significant cognitive function. It's not perfect, but it's more than we dared hope for. The settlement had grown significantly as word spread of Haven Ridge's success in treating recovering infected individuals. Families arrived weekly, carrying loved ones who had begun showing signs of returning humanity, seeking the medical expertise and rehabilitation programs that had made their community a beacon of hope in the post-apocalyptic landscape. Thorne supervised the construction of new housing complexes designed specifically for the rehabilitation patients, his construction expertise adapted to create spaces that could accommodate the physical limitations of people recovering from viral neural damage. The gruff worker had discovered an unexpected talent for working with the confused and often frightened individuals who were remembering how to be human after years of collective consciousness. Vera's husband showed up yesterday, he reported, his weathered face showing the mixture of joy and sorrow that characterized so many reunions with the recovering infected. He recognized her name when she spoke to him, but he doesn't remember their daughter yet. Could take months or years before his memory fully returns, if it ever does. The tragedy and hope of such reunions had become central to life in Haven Ridge. Families torn apart by infection were slowly being reunited, but the people who returned were often shadows of who they had been before. The process of recovering human consciousness was painful, incomplete, and frequently heartbreaking as loved ones struggled to recognize faces and relationships that had once defined their existence. Esperanza maintained communication with other settlements, coordinating the sharing of rehabilitation techniques and tracking the progress of recovery efforts across the continent. Her network had become the lifeline that connected scattered human communities, allowing them to share resources and support in their efforts to rebuild civilization. Reports from the California settlements indicate similar patterns, she announced during their weekly community meeting. The infected populations are fragmenting, but recovery rates vary significantly based on the rehabilitation support available. Communities with strong family connections and social structures seem to achieve better outcomes. Kai had adapted his engineering skills to develop assistive technologies that helped recovering infected individuals relearn basic motor functions and cognitive processes. His workshop produced communication devices, mobility aids, and memory assistance tools that had become essential to the rehabilitation process. Onyx maintained security for the settlement, but her role had evolved from sniper to guardian as she protected both human inhabitants and recovering infected from the occasional predator animals or hostile human groups that still posed threats to their peaceful community. The former police marksman had discovered that protecting hope required different skills than fighting despair. The memorial garden that occupied the center of the settlement honored those who had been lost during the apocalypse, but the newest addition was a special section dedicated to Meridian Cross. Her grave marker was simple: teacher, friend, hero, she showed us the way home. But the real memorial to their beloved educator was the school that bore her name and the children who played in its shadow. As evening approached and the settlement prepared for another peaceful night, Zephyr climbed the watchtower that had once been their last line of defense against the infected horde. Now it served as an observation post for monitoring the rehabilitation camps and watching for the occasional recovering infected individual who wandered too close to their community. In the distance, she could see the lights of other settlements, each one representing a community of survivors working to rebuild human civilization on the foundation of hope that Meridian's sacrifice had made possible. The world was still broken, still dangerous, still marked by the scars of the apocalypse. But it was healing, one recovered memory at a time. The radio crackled to life beside her, carrying a message from a settlement in former Colorado. Haven Ridge, this is New Denver calling. We've got a family here asking about rehabilitation programs. The father showed up 3 days ago, and he's been asking for someone named Meridian. Says she was his teacher once, a long time ago. Zephyr smiled, understanding that Meridian's influence had spread far beyond the neural network she had died to destroy. Every recovered infected person carried fragments of the lesson she had taught in those final moments, that human identity was stronger than viral control, that love could overcome fear, and that hope survived even in the darkest places. Tell them we're here, she replied into the radio. Tell them their teacher is waiting for them to come home. The stars appeared in the darkening sky, no longer witnessing the end of human civilization but the beginning of its rebirth. In schoolyards across the continent, children who had been given a second chance at childhood played games that honored the memory of a teacher who had loved them enough to save their future. Meridian Cross had taught her final lesson, and humanity was finally learning to remember who they were meant to be.